Well, we have not seen our next guest for quite a while. We've missed her. Dr. Harriet Fraud joins
Yeah,
us.
I've been away.
You've been away. Where did you
San
go?
Francisco.
You were in San Francisco.
Yeah,
You look
beautiful
happy.
San Francisco. Yeah, it was lovely. The parks are so beautiful. It was really a pleasure. It's very beautiful.
But something's wrong with the place.
What is it?
The people. There's something wrong. I spent 12 years living in San Francisco.
Wow.
My kids were born in San Francisco. There's something wrong because of the income inequality, because you can't afford to live there.
Well, we certainly have that here too. That's in every city. There isn't a city in the whole United States where two people working full time, earning minimum wage could rent an apartment. They can't afford it.
But the problem with San Francisco is you're not supposed to be unhappy. In New York, you come here, you don't come to New York to be happy.
No,
You come to New York because you have to be here. San Francisco, you're supposed to be happy. And everybody's a gourmand and a foodie, and their lifestyle is the most important thing, not their work ethic. And nobody can afford to live there. The only people who can afford to live there shouldn't be living. They should be rounded up, and they're horrible people. Anybody who can afford to live in San Francisco, I'm talking about the city itself. They should be they're horrible. It gave us Nancy Pelosi, and
it's
this
not a bad thing. But there are plenty of waiters who live in San Francisco and plenty of workers who live in San Francisco. But there is a yuppie vibe, and there's plenty of homeless people that live in San Francisco too.
and they just can't seem to do anything about it, like build housing for them. Well,
Well, they're ahead of us in New York in terms of affordable housing, and they have Chesapeake, even though the right wing's trying to get rid of them. So
right.
they have some advantages, but the main thing is it's beautiful and it's not too high except for downtown, which is awful, but there's so much beautifulness around, and that's great to take in. I've never lived there. I don't, know the people that well. I just love
There,
it.
there's a then I want to talk to you about Ukraine. There's a phenomenon of stand-up comics who started in San Francisco, and then they move to Los Angeles, and they get angry at San Francisco. It's a real thing where we get so angry that we had to leave San Francisco to go to LA, that San Francisco couldn't support us, and it's probably Oedipal. Anyway, let's talk about something more cheerful like Ukraine.
Ukraine, right? That's a laugh.
So
Yeah.
here's what I say. I am rooting for the blue and gold. Putin is a war criminal. He this is horrible what they've done to Ukraine, but in the end, it all could have been prevented 10 years ago if we didn't promise them NATO and the EU, knowing that we couldn't deliver. We
Look, there's no good guys here. Americans like to,
Well, the Ukrainian people are good and the Russian people are good.
most people are good. However, you know, Americans like to have God and the devil, the good people and the bad people. They're both bad, not the Ukrainians, not the fellow Russians. But look, when the Soviet Union fell in 1989, 1990, there was no point in NATO except to further American imperial ambitions. And we promised that since there was no Warsaw Pact of the nations associated with the Soviet Union, there really shouldn't be any NATO either against the Soviet Union. In fact, at the time, Khrushchev and Gorbachev wanted to join NATO. What's the point? No point in having an adversary. And slowly the United States circled the Soviet Union with hostile bases with NATO. All the Soviet former countries were armed with missiles. I want to remind you that when Cuba started a base with Russia during John F. Kennedy, he risked World War III
Right.
to get that base closed. And it was 90 miles from home. Whereas Ukraine has a 1,500-mile border with Russia. And Russia depends basically economically on oil and natural gas. 3 of their pipelines run through the Ukraine. They were surrounded. And in the Minsk agreement in 2014, it was promised that they would stay neutral, like Finland, forever. And that no further NATO countries will be ringing the Soviet Union like a noose. Now, we have fallen back on all those agreements. Why didn't they do something before? Well, they didn't, because the balance of power in the world is changing and everything is a bit shaky. The United States has lost every war since World War II. And people noticed that in Afghanistan, we were running for our lives helter-skelter with no planning and no participation in decision-making with our allies who were caught with their pants down, having to run helter-skelter. They also noticed that we lost in Vietnam, that we lost in Iraq, that we bombed those people silly, that all those same scenes that you see in Ukraine, if we had been allowed to see them then, would have been with slightly colored people suffering the same way, being bombed, being destroyed, holding their babies' tattered limbs, and so on. And so we are in no position to judge. Putin is bombing maternity hospitals. He is a pig. He has gotten billions from his job. He is a dictator. He's an autocrat. He's a misogynist. There's no good guys here. However, NATO provoked him, and the United States wanted a readjustment to put us on top with Europe, who needs a readjustment too. Germany, which was against this whole confrontation with Iraq, changed their mind. Schultz, who got in by a hair and was not, and is a nominal socialist, wanted to please the right wing. So what he got was permission to rearm Germany. Quite a mistake, since they've done that twice. It hasn't worked out so well. There are no good guys here. I should point out, Russia has been invaded by the United States and other forces twice in their history. We have never been invaded, ever, ever, ever. And so that there are no good guys. We are provoking a war there and the destruction of people who are, quote, collateral damage. And we are being deluged with propaganda showing us what war does, the way we were not for Afghanistan and Iraq and Yemen and all the others. And so, and what they say is the first casualty of war is truth. That's true. Both sides are lying to their people. However, this was a confrontation provoked by the United States imperial ambitions around NATO, and the Ukrainian people are being sacrificed. And of course, they're lying. They're saying every Ukrainian is standing and fighting. The men are all fighting. No, they have conscription and they're not allowed to leave the country, although plenty are hiding. And 2 million have left, so not everyone is standing and fighting. And the United States says, stand up and fight till the last Ukrainian, okay? As are the Germans, who are in on this too. And so they are being sacrificed. And so it's a tragedy. It's a human tragedy, but the United States is hardly in a position to point the finger, since our fingers are dripping with blood. And so it's a horrible situation. And the propaganda deluge is outrageous. It's not both sides. It's one side. I should also point out that Russia has two basic economic exports that allow it to exist as an economy: natural gas and oil. 3 of their pipelines run through Ukraine. They're not going to let them be cut off. You're cutting off their lifeblood there. So even though I think Putin is a monster, I think he was provoked because they're trying to do something to reinstate their position, since China is the new hegemon of the world and not the United States. And now things are very shaky. They've taken over Russia's assets in the United States. They want to claim the oligarchs' huge mansions, which they should claim all the huge mansions that are basically safe deposit boxes around the United States, safe deposits for the rich. But that any other country that has any sense will be thinking, whoa, don't invest there. What if they have trouble with you? That's gone. And so we're in an untenable position because of trying to hold on to power as China becomes the new hegemon, and Russia will trade with China. It will be less convenient because it's further away in many ways. And they want Russia. They want to immiserate Russia because Russia has the greatest natural resources in the world. And this is a disgusting political operation where the pawns in the game are the Ukrainians, and they're getting killed the way ordinary people always do in wars, whether in Vietnam or Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, or anywhere else.
Right.
So I just think we have to decide there's no God and devil here. There's no good guys at all.
Well, what about Zelensky? It's hard not to like Zelensky.
It's hard, but I think he's scripted by the United States. He was put in between her and
I'm sorry,
Victoria, what's her name? I always want to forget it, so I do. Where she said when they organized getting rid of the pro-Russian in the Ukraine, the memo said, should we put in the clown? That's Zelensky, because he was a comedian. No offense to you, they're not all clowns, but hey. And so he was put there by the United States. And I think he was promised a lot and he's not getting it. And they do say, we will fight to the last Ukrainian, not us. And so I don't think he's a hero. I think he's basically scripted from Washington, who put him in his position. And it's all an ugly mess. But I don't think we're in a position to point a moral finger, since our fingers are bloody.
Right, right. What could we have done differently to stop the invasion? What could Biden have done in December?
Well, he could have said, okay, Trump ignored all of this, but we will abide by the Minsk agreement that we all signed. And we will make sure that there are no further NATO bases circling your country, and that Ukraine will be neutral like Finland for the rest of its existence. That's the end for NATO in the Ukraine. He could have done that. It would have been a smart idea. There wouldn't have been any war.
And when these countries, like the Soviet Union, like Russia,
right?
What we are being told is that Putin says the worst thing that ever happened to him was the fall of the Soviet Union. And I've heard him say that the fall of the Soviet Union was like the Kennedy assassination for him. So what do they really want? Do they want resources? They want pride? What does somebody like Putin?
Putin, I think, wants total control and amassing millions. Putin is Putin is smart, unlike Trump, but it's all the same sort of things. Putin dated Wendy Murdoch when she and Murdoch separated. And they went on double dates and traveled with Ivanka Trump, and her husband, the android.
Right.
That's the little circle they're in. And I think the United States wants to recoup its imperial position and get Europe on its side, because after all, we told Germany we didn't want them to build a pipeline with Russia, and they went ahead and did. Now they're not going to do it. They're on our side, and they're getting rearmed to the tune of $100 billion in armaments. All NATO countries have to buy their weapons and their armaments from the United States. So there's a nice little boon to the armaments industry.
Right.
And so that will come out ahead. All these people will die, but the arms manufacturers will do wonderfully.
I, at the top of the show, said something that I have trouble believing, but I think it's true. The arms manufacturers need new markets.
They should do. Capitalists always need new markets.
And they want you have to, if Ukraine becomes a part of NATO, 2% of their GDP off the top has to be spent on weapons.
That's right. Bought from the United States. It's specified in the NATO agreements.
So isn't that why?
That's one of the reasons why. The other is to kind of reinstate America's imperial position, because we're going down. We are a debtor nation. China is the nation we're most indebted to. China has its Belts and Roads initiative, where Africa has remained neutral here in spite of our entreaties, because they also depend on Russia. And China, primarily China, which is doing all sorts of things. And China is the leading economy in the world now.
Explain to me evil, because everybody I know watches these true crime reality shows, The Serial Killer Next Door.
Yeah.
And there are bad people in the building I live in. There's probably somebody who's like doing some really nasty stuff. Okay, it's me, but we're capable of imagining evil.
Yeah, because part of us, we're all connected as people. We're fascinated because that's a capacity for all of us. Luckily, all of us aren't acting on it.
But
we're all connected.
But when we try to imagine that there are people who are in the weapons industry, mm-hmm. who have no problem sleeping at night, ginning up phony enemies that result in hundreds of thousands of people dying, they somehow can rationalize this. I mean, they're serial killers, essentially.
They are. They're definitely serial killers, as Bob Dylan in his song Masters of War sang. He said, "I'll tell you one thing, though I'm younger than you, even Jesus himself can't forgive what you do." But they think they're successful because they're making money. In the capitalist world, you don't care about the suffering you cause. Bezos doesn't care about all those people who died because they were crowded in warehouses during COVID. He's upset that they've had 3 strikes in New York alone in their warehouses. But, it
was interesting. I used to work for somebody who was for the invasion of Iraq. And I was working intimately with this person who was beating the war drum. And I remember saying to him, aren't you worried that this is going to turn into Vietnam? And he said, no way Iraq will turn into Vietnam. And then I never forgot this. It was like a month before the invasion of Iraq. he went on Chris Matthews, Hardball. And Chris Matthews, I have my problems with Chris Matthews, but he said to this person, body bags, you're for the war, body bags. How many body bags should America order?
Lots.
And the person I was working for was appalled that he would ask such a rude question. And I went, really? Like you don't, he goes, that was a horrible, rude question to ask me. It was inappropriate. And I thought, really, you're beating the war drum.
You don't think people will die?
And you're not, nobody should ask you how many Americans are going to die, how many Iraqis are going to die. And he has since never apologized for beating the war drum. They rationalize it. It was his thinking is the same thinking as Bill Kristol. The war was a great idea. But they executed it wrong.
Yeah. Well, look, one of the reasons people don't realize the cost is there was a law after Vietnam where they showed children whose bodies were on fire since we dropped napalm on villages and so on. You weren't allowed to have photographs of any of that, or the coffins, or the torture, or the collapsed buildings, or the limbless children. They weren't allowed. So it was cleansed from the American media what war is. It's like these people on television, these war widows from Afghanistan crying. And what did you think? If he's going into the army, what did you think he was going to do? Sing? No. You're going to kill people and they'll be upset and try to kill you. And I think Russia did not fight back as we encircled Russia with a noose of NATO, because Russia lost 30 million people during World War II. I think the United States lost 600,000, I'm not sure.
Something around that, yeah.
Because people fought in the streets, and Russia has been invaded twice. We have never been invaded. People don't want to go to war, but I think Putin felt pushed to the edge, and he felt that the American empire couldn't resist him now in a way that it might have before. And neither could Europe. And that this was his chance. And because America is not what it was. I think he's horrible. They're not just bombing armaments, they're bombing maternity hospitals. He's a monstrous misogynist. Pussy Riot had it right. But on the other hand, we have pushed him to the wall. And Americans are gung-ho for war because they don't know what it is.
Right. It's very simple. You get to be my age. There are 26-year-old young bucks who are about a foot taller than I am, and they steal a cab from me or a parking spot. It's not fair. It's not fair that they're stealing my cab or parking spot. And I'll say, hey, what are you doing? And they go, F you, old man. And I go, I probably shouldn't pick a fight with this person.
Wait, because America's like a jungle. Everybody's armed. It's crazy. In New York, they don't allow everyone to carry arms, but that doesn't stop people.
Right. But the point I'm making is it's not fair that this person is stronger than I am. It's not fair that Putin has nuclear weapons and we can't go to war with him, but we agreed on mutual assured destruction, never go to war with Russia because both of us have nuclear weapons and we will destroy the planet. It's not fair that Ukraine can't join NATO. It's not fair.
It's not fair if they join it. They have to remain neutral because otherwise Russia has a noose around its neck. And you can't do that. Look, just like we didn't allow Cuba 90 miles from home. This isn't 90 miles, this is the border of 1,500 miles.
Right.
It's a provocation. It's a
Fantastic.
provocation, and the United States hoped it would provoke and maintain its supremacy, but it can't. We're no longer the biggest, the most prosperous, the fastest growth in the world. We aren't. And I think that once your imperial peak has been reached, you should say, okay, let's devote ourselves, which the United States has not done, to a peacetime economy. We've never done that. That's why there's $1 trillion for war, and the schools are terrible. What? And support services don't exist. And we're one of the only advanced countries that doesn't have universal child care and medical care and elder care. You know, that it's an imperial power holding on. And Putin is a monster.
Yep.
And
Dr. Harriet Frutt is the host of Capitalism Hits Home. It's not just in your head. And she has a show on Pacifica Radio here in New York. It's on WBAI, Wednesdays at 2:30. The name of it being?
Interpersonal Update. But this week it's being changed because they're having the Supreme Court hearings for Ketanji Brown. Also, I have Capitalism Hits Home is my podcast alone. It's not just in your head. I do with Liam Tate from England and Ikoi Hiroi, who's in the United States.
How do people contact you?
hfraud@gmail.com.
It's good to have you home.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Sorry
Sorry about the non-patriotic news.
On this show?
Yeah, that's true. Take care.
Thank you so much.